It all starts like this. I came home from the market with 3 bags, a backache and the expectation that I would take a cold shower and pass out on the sofa. But before I even opened the gate, I saw something hanging between my 2 oldest trees. 2 giant oaks that I planted with my father when I was still a teenager, who saw me hit them with my lawnmower and almost become a rural martyr. Well, between them was a hammock. Not just any hammock, a white embroidered hammock, the kind that looks like it was bought on a minimalist decorating website by someone who believes that aesthetics are more important than common sense. I stopped. I dropped the bags on the dirt floor. I stared at it, like someone seeing a UFO. Because it wasn't just the hammock that caught my eye. It was what was on top of it. A hardcover book with a gold ribbon marker, a round pillow embroidered with the word gratitude, and a thermos with green tea, all strategically placed. A small altar of peace and selfishness. It didn't take long to find out who the owner of the installation was. The new neighbor. The same one who had already shown up complaining that my rooster crows at inappropriate times, and that the noise of the leaves on the autumn ground gave a feeling of visual dirtiness. She, who walked down the street with the posture of someone who was born on a pedestal and refuses to step on the real ground. In the previous days, she had been walking around the neighborhood, praising the trees, asking how old they were, saying that they had an ancient energy. I thought it was just the talk of people who need to dramatize even oxygen. Little did I know that she was probing the territory to put her own illegal spa in the middle of my yard. She tied that net with reinforced nylon ropes, without the slightest respect for where the most sensitive branches were. It was so tight that it felt like the trees were being pulled against each other. A botanical suffocation. I had no immediate reaction. I stood there for a good 5 minutes, trying to process the degree of audacity. It was as if someone had parked a car in your living room, lit some incense, put on some ambient music and gone out shopping, totally unconcerned with the fact that this was no place for any of that. I went into the house, left the shopping on the table, sat on the sofa, and stared at the ceiling. I tried to think rationally, but my brain was boiling. Not because of the hammock itself, but because of the audacity, the cluelessness, the habit of people like this to think that everything is decorative, including other people's territory. I spent the rest of the day watching from the window. In the afternoon, she appeared, in a bathrobe, as if she were on the terrace of a resort. She lay in the hammock with a book open, put on some low music, one of those instrumental ones with the sound of clinking glasses and fake birds, and stayed there, on my land, among my trees, without bothering to ask if she could. She turned sideways, sipped her tea, and gave that performative sigh of someone reconnecting with their inner self. The problem? Her inner self was reconnecting on top of my soil. At the end of the afternoon, she went home. She left the hammock up, as if it were a fixed part of the neighborhood decoration. That was the last straw for me. It wasn't just a lack of respect. It was emotional vandalism, aesthetic violence, decorative colonization. I stayed up all night, thinking about it. It was as if every knot in that rope had tied a knot in my patience. I went to sleep with the sound of the hammock swaying in the wind like a continuous debauch. The idea came to me around 3 in the morning, when I got up to get a drink of water and saw the white silhouette of the hammock in the moonlight. It looked like a bourgeois ghost haunting me. The next day, I went out to the back shed and picked up a box that had been there since last summer, the remains of the pruning of the hawthorn tree, which I had set aside to burn. Thin branches, full of long thorns, dry and well-preserved. I spent the day braiding them as if it were a macabre craft project. I replaced the hammock ropes with these carefully positioned branches. I covered them with a fabric cover identical to the original, just to keep the disguise. And on the trunk of the tree, I tied a sign with a simple phrase: "Nature is free, but it has thorns." The finishing touch. I sat on the balcony with my coffee and waited. The sun rose, the heat appeared, and along with it, the creature, this time in a light dress, expensive slippers, and a hat that looked like it had been designed by someone with a hatred of common sense. She crossed the yard like someone returning to their summer home. She didn't even look at the window. She didn't even feign embarrassment. She got into the hammock, fluffed up the pillow, and threw herself into it with all the confidence of someone who thinks the whole world is a playground. The instant her back touched the fabric, I heard the sound. That muffled pop of surprise. That restrained, ouch! The silence that followed was absolute. She remained motionless, probably trying to understand what was happening. 2 seconds later, she jumped out of the hammock as if she had sat on a live hedgehog. She shouted a swallowed swear word, stumbled backwards, looked at the trees as if they had conspired. He read the sign. He looked around for a camera, thinking it was a prank. But the prank was her ego, bleeding slowly. And me, smiling, calmly, swirling my mug, smelling the coffee and the artisanal justice. The next day, the mood in the neighborhood was different. You know when the air gets a bit heavy, as if everyone knows something has happened, but no one wants to be the first to comment? That was it. The sun was the same. The birds were singing. The wind was blowing calmly, except that there was a certain uncomfortable silence between the fences. The suspense of a bad soap opera. The woman didn't appear in the street. Normally, at that time of day, she would be parading around with a cloth bag full of organic vegetables and the look of someone who has just given a lecture on chakras. But nothing, no sign of her. Not a step, not even the sound of the electronic gate. Nothing. I confess I was curious. I walked around to the front of her house. Everything was closed up, the windows covered with thick curtains. The car in the garage, parked a little crooked, just like someone who arrived nervous. I laughed alone, but my laughter was interrupted when I saw the HOA sign swaying in the wind. The monthly meeting was to be held that evening, and something told me that the hammock, or rather the thorn bush incident, would be on the agenda. I spent the day pretending to be normal. I cut the grass, fed the animals, and organized the shed. But deep down, all I could think about was how she would react, because people like that don't swallow a blow like that quietly. They can't. They'll find a way to spin it, play the victim, point the finger everywhere but at themselves. It was only a matter of time. Evening came. The Residents' Association room looked like a convention. Everyone was well-dressed, holding coffee cups and pretending to be interested in agendas such as the ideal height of the hedge and permitted times for cutting firewood. She arrived late, with giant sunglasses and a scarf around her neck, as if she had just left a funeral of her own dignity. She sat on the edge of the table, without greeting anyone. The atmosphere chilled by 2 degrees. The network's agenda appeared under item 4, right after the discussion about slippery sidewalks. A gentleman from the board began by talking about respect for private spaces and the limits between coexistence and invasion. Nobody said her name, but they didn't have to. It was obvious. Even the neighbor's dog would know who they were talking about. She raised her hand, theatrically. Nail done, ring sparkling, everything in place. With that voice that mixes forced sweetness with boiling anger, she began, "I just wanted to enjoy the natural surroundings. I didn't imagine that my little hammock would cause so much discomfort. But what shocked me was the violence of the response. Thorns. Really? That was an aggression." Everyone looked at me. I smiled, with the most placid face on the planet. I took a deep breath and spoke in the calm voice of someone who sleeps well at night. The net was in my trees, on my soil, without request, without warning. What was put there was taken away artistically, and with a message. Nobody was seriously hurt, just the ego. Silence. Those seconds when the tension almost drips from the ceiling, until someone laughed. A short, restrained, but real laugh, and then another, and another. Within seconds, half the room was trying to hold in its laughter. Not because they were laughing at her pain, but at the absurdity of it all. The way she tried to play the victim of her own arrogance. The meeting continued, but she didn't. She got up, picked up her bag, and left the room without looking at anyone. At the gate, she tripped over her own heels, a perfect symbol of the emotional tumble she had taken. The next morning, the net was gone. No trace of it. No fabric, no pillow, no bottle of green tea, nothing. The trees breathed a sigh of relief again. So did I. But then the notes began. First, one on the gate, in fine, elegant handwriting. You could have been civil. You preferred to be rude. The next day, another. The neighborhood is watching. And one more, stuck in the mailbox. There are more peaceful ways of resolving conflicts. I didn't answer any of them. I just kept them all. I even had a little notebook for it. Letters from the wounded ego. On the outside, she kept quiet, but inside, you could feel the boiling. She needed to regain control, to reverse the embarrassment. Only this time, she wasn't dealing with a stooping neighbor. She was dealing with someone who knew the value of a boundary and a good dose of thorny irony. The most curious thing was that, over time, more people started to come around. People who hadn't talked to me before now stopped by, said good morning and commented on the weather. Some even complimented my trees. One even said, "They're so much more alive now, aren't they?" And so alive, so free. And if anyone wants to try it again, there are plenty of thorns in store. As the weeks went by, the story of the net became legend. It didn't take long for it to take on a life of its own, cross fences, change tone, and spread through messaging groups like fire through dry straw. What began as a simple act, a creative substitution of ropes for thorny branches, has become something of a local myth, a constant murmur, always with a touch of exaggeration that made it all the better. Someone said that she had gotten stuck in the hammock and couldn't get out because of the thorns. Another swore that she cried, "Why are you doing this to me?" as she ran across the lawn. There were even those who said she had to have a tetanus shot. None of that was true, but it wasn't my job to correct it either. After all, the best stories are those tempered by collective chaos. Things took on absurd proportions when a local influencer, one of those who thinks recording a story with a ring light is investigative journalism, passed by my street and saw the two trees. She filmed it, pointed with her finger, made a face of mystery, and dropped the magic phrase, "They say this is where the thorn net case happened." Heavy vibe, people. That was it. That was all it took to become a gossip hotspot. On weekends, curious onlookers began to appear, couples walking hand in hand, teenagers with their cell phones in their hands, even a lady who wanted to see where the power went off. There was even a guy who asked me to take a photo of him lying among the trees. Without a net, of course. He said it was for local folklore. I denied it with a smile. He left disappointed. Across the street, the woman was watching everything through the window. The curtain moved slightly, always with that same gap that showed half her face. She didn't come down, she didn't interact, but she was there. And the more people commented, the more she shrank into her own bitter silence. The climax of the collapse was when the HOA announced a community event, the Living Trees Walk, a symbolic walk to celebrate the old trees in the neighborhood, with a guided tour and everything. Mine, of course, were on the list. When the poster was unveiled, with a cartoon illustration of two trees and a hammock cut down the middle, she freaked out. On the morning of the event, I received an anonymous email with the subject, "You will repeat this exhibition." All it said in the body of the email was, "Peace is not born of mockery." I kept it. One more for the threat notebook. On the day of the walk, the weather was delicious. Clear skies, fresh air, lively people. There were locals, visitors, even a freelance photographer saying he was doing a report on suburban microconflicts. I swear, he asked me if he could record a statement about the moment I decided to put the thorns in. I told him I wasn't going to give an interview, but that he could listen to the branches tell the story. People passed by, watched, laughed, and pointed. Some thanked me for keeping the green space preserved. Others made discreet jokes. One girl walked past slowly, looking up, and said to her friend, "You can even feel that the trees are happier now. Like, avenged, you know?" Her friend agreed, like someone who had just watched a documentary. Behind them, two teenagers were talking about setting up a podcast called Forbidden Networks. I laughed. Meanwhile, in the woman's house, the tension was growing. The window was closed. The curtain was still. No sign, but you could feel it. It was eating her alive inside. Public humiliation disguised as popular art. She lost control of the narrative, and worse, she couldn't get it back. 2 days later, the final blow. She sent a pamphlet to all the residents. White envelope, clean typography, formal communique tone. Inside, a huge text talking about invaded privacy, disrespect for personal space, and a formal request for the trees on my property to be removed from the community route. Yes, you read that right. She wanted to censor the trees. The response was immediate. The HOA group exploded. People laughing, others outraged, some wanting to turn the case into a t-shirt. The phrase, "Trees are not your emotional property," was the most liked of the month. After that, it disappeared completely. She stopped going out. She stopped sending notes. She stopped trying. My trees, on the other hand, remained standing, strong, with light marks from the old thorns, like the scars of those who have been disrespected but survived. A mute reminder that not every invasion needs to be answered with a shout. Sometimes, just the subtle touch of annoyance is enough. And the most poetic thing? Since then, no one has dared hang anything from any tree in the neighborhood. It's become a kind of new, unwritten code. Don't mess with the roots of those who know how to defend themselves. The silence that settled over the woman's house after the flyer was the kind of silence that carries weight. A muted sound that screamed defeat. The house remained static, closed up, as if every window had become a scar. No cars in the garage, no deliveries, no visitors. Even the old yoga friends didn't show up anymore. It was as if the neighborhood itself had canceled that figure without having to say anything directly. Everyone knew, everyone remembered, but nobody talked. And that was worse. While she hid, the neighborhood flourished. The children started playing in the street again. The neighbor in front started selling pot cakes again. Raoul, who had never spoken to me beyond a vague nod, brought me a jar of honey and said that the bees seemed calmer after the spirit of the ego was expelled from the oak tree. I didn't understand if it was a joke or mysticism, but I thanked him anyway. The two trees became a symbol. The branches became firmer, the leaves greener, as if they had gained a new social function. From time to time, I watered them more affectionately, almost as if I were thanking them for having endured everything quietly. Because deep down, they were the real victims of it, tied up, squeezed, used as a support for other people's vanity. A month later, when everything seemed to have settled down, the unexpected happened. A removal truck pulled up in front of her house, a big one, with a blue tarpaulin and white lettering, uniformed drivers, stacked boxes, an expensive sofa wrapped in plastic. She only showed up for 5 minutes. Sunglasses, linen pants, hair tied up, no glance, not a word. She climbed into her car, closed the door, and drove off without a trace. The residents watched him leave in silence. There was no celebration, no farewell, just a collective feeling of relief. Like when a wisdom tooth suddenly stops hurting. You don't even celebrate. You're just grateful that it's over. Her house remained empty for a while, and the legend of the hammock became a story told by old residents to new neighbors, always with a restrained smile and an air of, "This used to be busier." The space between the trees remained empty. Nobody ever tried to put anything there again. It was like an undeclared altar, a warning, a reminder. Months later, a new family bought the house. A young couple with a young daughter and an unruly dog. They arrived with cardboard boxes, laughter, and no history of bullshit. The woman came up to me, brought me an apple pie, and asked, "Do you mind if we hang some Christmas lights on the trees in December? Just decorations. No net, no drama." I took a deep breath. I smiled, and I answered calmly, "As long as it's with love, it's fine." They've suffered enough. She understood. She laughed. She said she didn't like exaggeration either. And she left with her daughter running after the dog, who, by the way, tried to climb up the trunk and was scolded on the spot. A scene of peace. A scene of new beginnings. Today, when I pass by and look at those two trees, I don't just see wood and leaves. I see an entire chapter of my tested patience. I see the portrait of audacity being trimmed by thorns and irony. I see proof that silence has power, that sarcasm is an art, and that sometimes it's enough not to lower your head to put everything back together. The sign is still there, a bit crooked, with worn paint, but firm. Nature is free, but it has thorns, and no one dares to doubt it anymore. And if you liked this video, don't forget to leave a comment and a like.